I mean, there's no consistency there, and that bothers me.
So, speaking of things that the governor thinks is insignificant, AIM funding, aid and incentives for municipalities, that looks like it's going away.
Well. It's going away for certain towns and villages, and I say hooray, because
Really?
Yes, and let me tell you why. So if you look at who's impacted, right, the towns and villages that are really going to lose their funding through this are the towns and villages with the most robust tax bases, property tax bases. Because the towns and villages that use it for 2% or more of their funding need it, right? And they're going to get to keep it. So they were saying, like around Rochester, like Hilton's going to lose theirs. Westchester County is going to lose theirs in all but like 2 areas that tend to be the less wealthy sections of Westchester County, if you believe those exist, and I guess they do. But the point is, the same thing with school funding, okay? Like the gap elimination issue. This state has not found a way to tease out who is really in need and who is not. And every formula they come up with ends up putting wealthier areas way farther ahead than areas that are not as wealthy. And this is one way, I think, of finally addressing some of that disparity. I know you're not going to agree with me.
Well, just because I've seen some of the names of the communities that are going to be affected here in the Finger Lakes, and like Rushville, I think, is one of the examples that sort of sticks out in my mind. They are not financially stable.
Now I've had this discussion with Rushville's supervisor many a time. Okay, well, former supervisor. Rushville's taxable assessment in Ontario County is quite high. Now, they choose to keep their tax rate low, so it does look as though they don't have as robust a pot of money. But if you look at comparatively the percentage of burden on the taxpayer, some of these communities keep their taxes low because they're being subsidized by the state, whereas other communities, their tax rates are moderate or high, and the state money still is just kind of helping to run things. And why is that? Because these larger communities contain the tax-exempt amenities that draw people to a community. Churches, schools, hospitals, colleges do not pay property tax. So those communities need more state aid to help subsidize the robust cultural offerings that draw people to those locations. But rural areas that have a lot of tax base and not a lot of tax-exempt properties should be able to pay fuller freight.
Okay. So the problem with that, I think, is that you're looking at it from the taxable property standpoint. And I don't think that's necessary. I think it's easier to look at why a community like Rushville keeps their taxes low might have more to do with the financial condition of the individual humans who live in those communities. And
do you want to tell me that the average person in Rushville has less ability to pay than the average person in Geneva? I would say not.
I have no idea. But I know that there is a disparity between, and you taking it from the Geneva perspective, I think is sort of symbolic of what the larger debate and issue is in New York State. Right. Rural versus urban. Rural has a whole different slate of problems than urban does. And when you start to elevate those taxes in those small communities that already aren't playing the same, if you want to take it in like the economic development lens, they're not playing on the same playing field. You know, it's not a level playing field. Right. And I also think that, this is kind of one of those scenarios where where's that money going to go? Is it going to stay in upstate? Right. Is it going to stay in the Finger Lakes? Is it going to stay near those communities in Rochester that really need it? Or, in a place like Geneva who maybe needs it more than others because they don't have the money?
That's a fair criticism that the money is going to be reabsorbed. But remember, it's supposed to be offset by this new assessment of sales tax on places like Amazon and stuff for third-party sellers. So that the idea is that those areas, by whatever financial calculations they've done, are going to be a wash in terms of what they're actually receiving in state dollars. It's just coming from a different pot of money, which I think is a more equitable pot of money. But I want to say one thing, though. Don't you see this as another push towards getting local governments to ask that fundamental question that none of them want to grapple with, which is, why do we exist? Let's take this to a philosophical level, but why do so many towns and villages and cities exist with the layers of government that we have? I know you don't want to get into the Seneca County water situation, but let me just say one thing. When you have a community buying a service from one community and selling it to another community and then, trying to figure all that out, that is not unique to Seneca County, okay? Every upstate community, and by upstate, I mean all of non-New York City in this way, not just the way we traditionally think of upstate, has these multi-layers of bureaucracy and government. And I have to ask, is that in the best interest of the people living in those communities? Or is it just a holdover of the way we've always done it? And I see this aid to municipalities as being one more kick in the pants toward, let's start asking these tough questions. If a community can't get basic stuff done on its own in this small configuration it has, maybe it needs to work with another group. Maybe it should consolidate.
Yes, in a perfect world, absolutely. I've probably been one of the loudest advocates in Seneca County of a water authority that's ever, in the last 2 years. I've probably written 3 columns about it.
Yep.
You know what? I get that. Working together, that's why I didn't have a huge problem with, go back to the shared services initiative. Mm-hmm. On paper, it makes sense, and it's the right thing to do.
Right.
But municipalities are already doing that to some degree. Now, we can argue until the sun goes down about whether they're doing it the way they should or they're doing it thoroughly enough. But one, you have to have political will. Mm-hmm. And 2, you have to actually sort of have the vision and the execution skills to get that done. I'm not sure a lot of our elected officials, frankly, can get that done. So you backpedal into this scenario where the state then comes down and says, well, if you don't do it, you may not get reimbursed for this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. And it creates that division. You're creating that division between people feel like, instead of putting it out there or building a system where people are just encouraged to do it for the benefit of their own community, you're creating a scenario where their backs are against the wall and they have to do it or else.
Right.
And if they can't come up with a way, like the way the Shared Services Initiative came to be, it was really quickly put together. Counties didn't really have a lot of time to get it together and come up with a good plan. You're put in this scenario where sort of like the critics of the early voting are saying, why didn't we wait until next year to implement this to actually, because now you're in a scenario where it's been signed into law this week and now next month or in 2 weeks, the timeline has been moved up 4 months.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the implementation is not ideal. I agree with you on that. But here's one of those things where if I were the governor, I mean, we keep talking about, his upstate initiative and the DRI. Here's what I would do, which is a crazy proposal, but I actually think in the long run would be helpful. I think you should tie the state aid to how compelling of a case a municipality can make for their need to exist as an independent entity. I think if you tell all these villages, we would like to see your description of why you, as a geographic, economic, whatever, place unto yourself, needs to continue to manage all of the things that you're doing, and not by a county and not by a neighboring community, but it needs to be you, independently organized. Give us the case for your continued existence, and we'll fund you. If that makes sense, we will fund you. But if it comes down to, well, because we want to, or because we've always done it this way, or because people don't want to lose their particular community identity as, this town of, within a village of, or vice versa, I don't think that's a good enough reason.
Yeah, you know what? My issue with it in general is one of the problems that I see is when you start to go down this road where you're saying, question everything.
Justify your existence.
Why do you even exist?
Right.
I see how many times have we sat here and said and spouted off to people and said, get involved in local politics because it's where you make the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. Well, every time we chip away at what a village can do, or whether a village or a town can even exist, I guess, we're chipping away at the opportunities that the average person actually has a means to have an impact on the way life is around them.
Oh, I don't know.
You're putting no, because what you're basically suggesting is with all of neither one of us, it appears, have much faith in Governor Cuomo, but apparently we have enough faith in his administration to dictate the terms and conditions under which municipalities exist.
Well, I'm not saying he would be the ideal implementer of such a policy. But what I'm saying is I don't want to dilute people's representation, right? I mean, this would change when you would move toward more of a legislature type county organization. I mean, this would definitely change the way in which
ditch the board, go with the legislature.
Yes.
Agreed.
That to me is a more sensible way of making sure that people's direct needs are addressed in a sound, reasonable way by a governing body. This would be a categorical shift in focus. So obviously, no one's ever going to do it because it's too much to take on. But what I'm saying is, if we could start thinking that way, if we could start thinking, why does I hate to pick on the town of Rushville. Like, why, or the village, why does that particular entity need its own highway department, its own, I don't actually think they have a village police department, but, why does municipality X need all of this? Well, is it really the case that it couldn't be provided by a coordinated effort?
And me and Ted Baker have had this conversation because he lives in Rushville.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Here's the catch.
Well, then I will pick on Rushville.
Where essentially you had a really unique scenario. So when dissolution was talked about there, you had this unique situation where half the village was in Ontario County, half of it's in Yates County, and it wasn't really something that anybody had ever accounted for before, I think, and it wasn't really something anybody had seen. So I think if it were just solely sitting in one county or the other, it probably would have gone through without much of a challenge. But there, you're not just talking about rolling a village into a town. You're talking about rolling a village into two separate towns in two separate counties.
Right. We shouldn't use that. Yeah, we shouldn't use that case then.
Bad example, but Lyons is another simple example here in the Finger Lakes. It made sense to dissolve. It worked. It wasn't, catastrophic. Everybody's still living and happy. I just
Seneca
think
Falls, not such a good,
not a great example. But at the end of the day, I think where villages are functioning, and dissolution is something that should be proposed by the people. It should not be pushed by elected officials. Where it works and where it makes sense, it should be executed. I do not like the state reaching in, reallocating funds, holding elected officials, this state. Maybe if it were the perfect administration, I would feel differently. But I just don't feel comfortable with this particular administration being the arbiter of all of that.
Okay. Yep. Point taken. I can agree with you on that.
We're going to have we're going to get Ted in here.
And we're going to have
we're going to have an intense debate about this very topic. We're going to make that happen. But yeah, we've gone well over an hour, so we got to get out of here.
Okay.
We'll be back next week. That's all the time we have for today. Be sure to follow along the program on Facebook. Search The Debrief to see the things we're sharing on social media and maybe even some bonus content down the road. We'll be back next Friday. So until then, be well and stay informed.